You may or may not be aware that in the 19 teens and 1920s, there was a ferocious persecution against the Catholic Church in Mexico. No holds barred. Lots and lots, and I'm talking thousands of Catholic folk killed, priests killed, nuns killed, parishes confiscated by the government, seminaries shut down. The government made it illegal to go to Mass or have your baby baptized or to receive the sacraments. Everything was shut down by the Mexican government. And priests who were ministering in clandestine ways, they were ferreted out and they were shot. People who were practicing their faith quietly in their homes, they were dragged out in the streets and shot. This is all documented history that nobody knows about. You may have heard of, or maybe you saw the movie For Greater Glory. That's a good movie. I recommend it. I liked it a lot. It shows kind of like what happened during the Cristero Revolution, which was an uprising of Catholic men who fought with guns against the atheistic government of Mexico. And they would have won, but they were betrayed. But you may wonder, how did that happen? How did it get to the point where the government of a thoroughly Catholic country, I think Mexico at the time was like 96, 97% Catholic. How on earth did it happen that the government would turn against the church and do everything possible to try to destroy it, which it didn't do? No government has ever been able to destroy the Catholic Church. They've tried. The Emperor Nero tried in the 60s, I don't mean the 1960s, the 60s, at the time of the apostles. And it's been tried over and over again ever since, and it never really works. It didn't work in Mexico. The faith is still strong there. But you may ask yourself, you may say to yourself, how did this happen? What on earth led up to this? The movie For Greater Glory is great, but it only shows you like a vignette of what was happening at the time. It doesn't explain how it got to that point. Well, I gave a talk, this is going back now, 10 years or so ago, called Viva Cristo Rey, the Catholic Persecution in Mexico. And it was professionally recorded. I gave this at Franciscan I take that back. I gave this at the Deep in History Conference. My good friend Marcus Grodi, he does the TV show called The Journey Home. And professionally recorded, and in this talk, it's about an hour long, I go into the history and the roots that led to the persecution of the Catholic faith within an inch of extinction in this talk. And I go back to the time of the Enlightenment, and I talk about the Enlightenment thinking and how that metastasized in different ways, and the role of Freemasonry and the rise of atheism. Let me give you an example. If you fly into Mexico City, chances are you're going to fly into the main airport, Benito Juarez International Airport. Benito Juarez, that's the name you hear over and over again. He was like this really big, significant figure in Mexican history. So as a little tidbit here, when the Emperor Maximilian, who was a puppet emperor, he was a creature of the French government. Napoleon III basically owned and operated Maximilian. He was in the shadow of his older brother, who was the Emperor of Austria-Hungary. And there was no real role for him. There was nothing he could really do. He was sort of tooling around as an admiral in the Navy, but there was not much for him to do. So some representatives of the aristocracy in Mexico, they sent an embassy to Vienna, and they asked him, would you come and be our emperor? You'll be the new emperor of Mexico. And he saw his shot. He saw some daylight, so he said, okay, I'll do that. Now, his brother, who was the emperor, he said, well, okay, if this is what you want to do, but if you do this, you have to sign this agreement saying that you completely divest yourself of any share in the imperial household and its riches and its titles and all that. In other words, if you go do this and become the emperor of Mexico, you forfeit all of the good things that you've got here as a member of this family. And that's what Maximilian did. So he goes to Mexico. Now, this is Civil War era. Okay, this is even pre-Civil War era, the Civil War era in the United States when this is happening. So he goes to Mexico, and he sets up shop, and he's got this wonderful palace. It's on the Zócalo. You can go there today and see. It's catty corner from the National Cathedral. It's this huge stone square, and you can fit 100, 200,000 people there. And at that time, the Imperial Palace is now like the government presidential building. more or less equivalent to the White House, but not exactly. But anyway, that's where he was with the Empress Carlotta. And so he had the vestiges, he had the semblance of an imperial court, but he didn't really have any power. And it was the French troops that were provided by Maximilian III that kept him propped up. Had they not been there, he would have been thrown out very quickly. Well, eventually, Napoleon had his own problems. Now, we're not talking about Napoleon Bonaparte. This is Napoleon III. Napoleon III had his own problems back in France and elsewhere. So he, under pressure of various kinds, he decides, I need these soldiers back. So he starts withdrawing them. This is where the celebration of Cinco de Mayo comes in, which for many Americans is just Cinco de Drinko, because they don't really know. It's not Mexican Independence Day. It is the celebration of the Mexicans under the leadership, politically speaking, of Benito Juarez, who defeated the French forces at the Battle of Puebla. That's what they're celebrating. And it did, after a fashion, sort of wind up, resulting in, eventually, down the road, the independence of Mexico from Maximilian and his sort of pseudo-empire. But in any case, that's when things started to unravel. So when it all sort of came to a grinding halt and the French troops were removed from Mexico, Maximilian is completely vulnerable. And so he tries to escape. He gets caught. He is sentenced to death by firing squad. Benito Juarez did not want to have any lingering chance that maybe this guy might come back and try to start the whole thing all over again. And all the royal courts of Europe, England and Denmark, and all of them, including Austria-Hungary, were begging for Benito Juarez to allow Maximilian to live, because he was like a non-entity. He was benign. He couldn't hurt a fly, basically. And Benito Juarez said, "Sorry, we're going to make a lesson out of him." So he and two of his, I think they were both generals, if I'm not mistaken, Miramon, and I forget the other guy. But anyway, they lined them up in front of a wall, and they shot them. So death by firing squad. Now, you may say, well, what on earth does this have to do with the persecution of the church in Mexico? Well, the reason is because the guy who orchestrated all of this, the guy who won in this power struggle, was Benito Juarez. You know what his first public act was when he became president of the new Republic of Mexico? His very first public act was he confiscated a major Catholic church in Mexico City and turned it into a Masonic Temple. That should give you a clue as to what was going on here. That's really where you begin to see this sort of this building, this momentum building against the church. It started there. And Benito Juarez in it was 1867, 1868, when he came to power, it kept going and going and going, and it developed along the lines of Freemasonry, which infested so many of the government positions in power and the military, and there was a kind of rank atheism that was building in these same echelons of power. And it got to the point where it came out in the open. And by the time you get to the 19-teens, and certainly by the 1920s, it all came out in the open, and there was this ferocious rampage of persecution against the Catholic Church, and thousands of Catholics were killed just for practicing their Catholic faith. You may say, I never heard this. That's right, you never heard this. Even if you're from Mexico, chances are you didn't hear any of this. Did you know there were concentration camps in Mexico where Catholics were rounded up and those who tried to escape were machine gunned, et cetera, et cetera? These are all facts of history, well documented, no question about it, and nobody knows about it anymore. So anyway, all of this long-winded lead up is simply to say the video of my presentation where I walk you through all the things that happened that led up to this persecution, it's available, and I'm going to post a link to this so that you can watch it for yourself. How's that for a build-up? But the reason why I want to share this with you is because, as a student of history, I'm looking around and I'm seeing ominous parallels today here in the United States. Right now, you're seeing statues of Junipero Serra being toppled or defaced. You're seeing statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary being defaced. You're seeing churches being burned. That's in early phase. That's an initial kind of phase. And the way these things tend to go, the phases begin ratcheting up, and it's no longer inanimate objects like statues and churches that are attacked. Then it gets to the point where actual flesh and blood people like you and me become the next targets. Now, I don't want to see that happen. I know you don't want to see that happen. But we're living in a very dangerous time. I can't even believe I'm saying it quite the way I'm saying it now. But look at 2020. Look at the last 7 months in this country. Did you ever, in your wildest fevered imagination, expect that you would see and live through some of the things that we're going through right now? And I'm not just talking about COVID. That's bad enough. But the riots and shutting down police departments and whole city blocks being taken over by hoodlums and criminals, and it being allowed? I never thought I'd see that. So my modest proposal is, at your leisure, pour yourself a beverage of choice, sit down, and do this with your family. I mean, the kiddos can listen to this. But listen to this talk. Watch it on TV. Watch it on your phone, whatever. It's free. This is my gift to you. But I want you to understand what led to that persecution. You know, like the old saying, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Well, I've learned from history, and I want you to learn from history. And I don't want to be lashed to the same people who are doomed to repeat history. I don't want to have to repeat it with them. I'd rather that we can change it and avert some of the problems that afflicted Mexico these last 100 years or so ago. So that's it. When we get to our next break, which is now, I'm going to post this for you. So you'll find it on my Twitter feed in about a minute, 90 seconds. It's at Patrick Madrid. It's the free YouTube video of my presentation. Watch it, share it. And more than anything else, I think we all need to learn from this. And as Jesus said, watch and pray, observe the signs of the times, be aware of what's going on around you. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. All of those things go into this. Be aware of what happened, because I'm telling you, things like that are happening again here. And I want you to know about that.
For more of The Patrick Madrid Show, visit relevantradio.com/Patrick.